We don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. The top story tonight on GB News. The US Coast Guard says it's expanding the search area where signals thought to sound out SOS were detected earlier on today as everybody races to locate a missing tourist submersible visiting the Titanic shipwreck in the North Atlantic Ocean. Well, at a news conference this evening, we heard that 5 surface assets and 2 remotely operated vehicles are currently deployed there. Officials did say, however, they don't really know what the detected sound signals might be, or indeed if they originate from the Titan, which is the name of the submersible. Audiologists from the US Navy are now analysing the recordings. 5 people are known to be on board the craft and they may have as little as 20 hours of oxygen left and limited rations on board. Captain Jamie Frederick from the US Coast Guard says rescuers have to remain optimistic.
The surface search is now approximately 2 times the size of Connecticut, and the subsurface search is up to 2.5 miles deep, exponentially expanding the size of the search area. We also have to factor in the ever-changing weather conditions, currents, and sea states that expand the search area every hour. There is an enormous complexity associated with this case due to the location being so far offshore, and the coordination between multiple agencies and nations.
Well, in other news today, a man has been arrested following what one witness described as a mad rampage with a pickaxe in West London outside a hospital. 2 people sustained injuries at the Central Middlesex Hospital in Park Royal, with one left with life-threatening injuries. The suspect's been admitted to hospital with injuries himself being described as self-inflicted. Armed police were deployed to the scene, but the incident was not treated as terror-related. The Home Office has said tonight there's no place for extremism after an Islamist hate cleric's talk was cancelled. A GB News investigation has found that Enayatullah Abbasi, due to speak in East London tonight, has previously spread hate speech, including praising the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. Abbasi delivered speeches in Birmingham and Nottingham as part of a nationwide tour after arriving in the country last week. The Home Office say they're tackling groups and individuals who sow division and hatred in UK society. Well, the country's inflation rate stayed the same despite expectations that there may be a fall. The Office for National Statistics released its figures showing inflation stayed at 8.7% up until May. That's the same rate as during April. It comes as the Bank of England is expected to announce its interest rate position tomorrow. Amid widespread speculation there may be another rise on the way. We'll keep you up to date, of course, on that throughout tomorrow on GB News. Now, the government has set out a major package of financial support for Ukraine to bolster the country's economic stability as it continues to push back Russian forces. The package includes a £20 million boost to insure companies working in Ukraine. The funding includes £2.3 billion worth of World Bank loan guarantees, and it's there to support the restoration of vital public services, including running schools and hospitals. The Prime Minister says Russia must pay for the destruction it's caused. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. You're with GB News.
Thank you, Polly. Hello and welcome to Headliners. I'm Simon Evans. Joining me tonight, making his Headliners debut, a man who was known as Tinky Winky back in the old days when he starred in Teletubbies. A man who is also known as Tinky Winky, but only on his OnlyFans. That's Stephen Allen and Dave Thompson. Hello, gents. How are you?
Good evening. Very well, thank you.
You good?
Yep.
Fired up, ready to go, Dave?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely marvellous. You've been monitoring the news from Hungary, I believe, mostly over the last few months. Is that
Well,
right?
I've been monitoring it in Hungary. Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Yes, I was. Yeah.
At a remote distance.
Yeah, I'm backwards and forwards.
So we're going to get an interesting perspective tonight. So let's have a look at the front pages. The Daily Mail. Tories turn on bank over rates crisis. We will be taking a look at that. The Telegraph. NHS lung cancer test for every ex-smoker. Ex, that is. Guardian. Guards at Del Monte pineapple farm accused of killings in Kenya. And takes a dark turn. Financial Times. Stubborn inflation piles pressure on Bank of England to take tough action. The Eye. Mortgage pain deepens as new rate rise sparks recession fears. And the Daily Star. Their last hope. That's the submarine. Well, those were your front pages. So we begin with the Daily Mail, Steve.
Yeah, their front page, hunt for Titanic tourist sub. Their main headline saying, as rescue ships float above Titanic wreck, banging sounds are heard. US Coast Guard tells the world we always have hope.
Do you think the banging sounds of one of them's got his hands around the throat of the fella who built the thing?
Yeah. I mean, this is like an actual version of a stress dream I'd have. The idea of being enclosed. There's one of the images I was looking at today points out that only one of the people in there can stretch their legs out at a time.
Oh.
So you'd have to take it in turns.
Horrific.
Just to stretch your legs.
The dynamics of the individuals involved, obviously there's a father and son. The fellow who's actually responsible for it. There's an inveterate adventurer who has been under enormous stressful conditions on a number of occasions, has made record-breaking sort of circumnavigations of the globe and so on. I mean, it feels so much like a film pitch, doesn't it? It's extraordinary.
Horrific.
And yet, of course, this is real-life people who are facing extinction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope Kate Winslet's OK.
Yeah. You've spent a bit of time underwater, haven't you, Dave? You used to be quite a keen scuba diver.
I was a PADI advanced diver until I had an accident and damaged the cochlea in my right ear.
Which feels quite trivial by comparison, but of course has been a long-term chronological. Would you say, I mean, do you have any notion of what it's like? Have you ever been stuck down? I mean, I know that people talk about horrific incidents in
No.
diving.
I know people who've served on submarines.
Right.
It's a weird thing because they have the latest technology in the world, but they can't get rid of wastewater because they're so deep down, so they don't wash. And they go out, they go for 6 months and they come back and they haven't washed in 6 months. There's 1 pint of water per person per day, which they use on tea.
Yeah.
And they all stink.
By me. I mean, I remember I've been on board a destroyer just outside the Falkland Islands once when I was doing some gigs out there.
Yeah.
And that obviously doesn't go underwater. And I thought that would be just like a regular ship. But once you go below decks, that's very much like a submarine. It's incredibly densely packed with equipment.
After that gig, can you now not sweat?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
That's
and I'm banned from Peterland Woking as well. It's all kind of weird. So anyway, we obviously wish them well. Don't want to appear too facetious about it. But there is something, I mean, it is just so filmic and bizarre how extraordinary the ironies just pile up. You know, a ship gone down to gulp at the Titanic meets the same fate. Anyway, there we are, the Financial Times.
Titanic, too, will have a much lower budget, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Must not laugh. Financial Times, Dave. What have we got on there?
I have got that Amazon were tricking people into subscribing to Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
And I think that this is probably, they deserve whatever they get.
Right.
Because I find when I'm trying to buy a book on Amazon, you need a degree in computer science to not subscribe to Amazon Prime.
Yeah, well, what they're saying they've done, which I think is very plausible, is they've created a sort of 1 or 2 click option to sign up. Yeah. And a something like 14 click and sort of multiverse kind of navigation to one, which it sounds totally... But I have to say, me personally, I don't want to get out. I'm very happy with Amazon Prime. It's about 80 quid a year. and everything you get delivered is free. Plus, of course, you get to watch the latest Lord of the Rings abominations. But yeah, no, I get things delivered roughly twice a day, I would say, from Amazon, so I definitely get my money's worth.
Does that mean the delivery driver is paid half as much?
Yeah, I think
for the non-prime.
They all know, I think, absolutely. They're all extraordinarily grateful to me for making them viable, I think.
I was a Prime member, and then I did cancel. So I've been through what it takes to cancel.
But you are sciencey, aren't you?
Exactly, and all I had to do was provide the head of Medusa. Managed to make a hollandaise sauce without it splitting. All of the simple things, really simple things.
They've probably based it, being Amazon, they've based the subscription on the piranha, haven't they? Once it gets its teeth into you, you can't shake it off.
I actually looked before we came on and to see how many clicks it was using the app on the phone. It's slightly hidden under the My Account section, but you can find it, and you could, like, within less than a minute, I could have...
I mean, I found it, though. I haven't tried to unsubscribe. You have a subscribe and save option sometimes, and you overestimate how often you're going to want something, and it starts piling up in your cupboard. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those can be quite tricky to navigate if you don't know what you're doing. So if this is harder, then I would...
Yeah, and it automatically clicks those as well. I want to buy this once. Why don't you buy it every month?
Yeah.
Oh, no, this is not how buying works.
That's right. You kind of go, I just want... I mean, I get chewing gum, for instance. I get that as a monthly delivery. I've just about worked out how frequently I get... I chew a lot of gum because I don't take sugar in my coffee anymore. I find if I chew gum, I can drink unsweetened coffee. It's a weird approach, but, you know, it works, although it does kind of make the gum a bit weirdly soft.
So you still have the gum?
Yeah, exactly. I use it as a sort of minty filter. And it's quite a nice, pleasant... I know it's slightly weird, but anyway. And then you order a kettle, and it goes, do you just want the one kettle? Maybe subscribe and save, you know. Most frequently 2 months. Once every 2 months, have a new kettle.
Maybe get a cooker as well.
They are so optimistic. The Guardian, Steve.
Their front page tells us the guards at Del Monte pineapple farm accused of killings in Kenya. This is about people who raid to try and nick some pineapples. The security guards there have been accused of using too much force. I mean, if the word killings in the headline, that tells you how much force. Some of the guards themselves have got wounds from where they've been attacked. I mean, it is gruesome.
And yet it's inescapably connected to the famous catchphrase.
From Del Monte.
Who knew about
Jambo.
This? Was it OK? OK from the top man. I've heard he says yes.
Is Del Monte is presumably not the Kenyan brand, is it? I would always assume that was
probably
one of
owned by
to me there.
a multinational company, probably owned by Amazon Prime.
If there's only two companies that own these sort of things, aren't they? It's the Dutch, what are they called, Unilever? Procter & Gamble. They're the only ones who own these things. I don't know.
You know more about it than I do.
Libelled them now.
I can't help wondering whether it's the Maasai warriors who run the security.
Right.
Because the Maasai warriors run the security of car parks in Kenya and Tanzania.
Yeah.
And I was at a car park, and he's wearing the traditional dress. He's responsible, that's his job. He's got a machete in his belt, a rungu, which is a traditional ebony-made club, and a mobile phone.
Do they still have the sign that says cars left at owner's risk?
Yeah.
You'd imagine, surely, he looks pretty well protected.
So did you get a sense that the car park regulations were going to be particularly well enforced by this kind of warrior?
They are. They can use them. They can use them, yeah.
I prefer that, to be honest. I recently picked up a parking fine for overstaying my 2-hour maximum at Toddington Services. Whereas I went in to finish an article I was writing, so I wouldn't normally spend 2 hours in a service station.
It's probably less painful just to be hit by a rungu club.
Yeah, I reckon if there'd been a warrior at the gate, you know, I would have probably not been quite so lax. Anyway, that's it for part one. Join us in part two. We have mortgage misery, diversity diversions and troubled teenagers. See you in a couple of minutes.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to Headliners. Guiding us through part 2, we have a safe pair of hands and a half, Stephen Allen and Dave Thompson. Yeah. Not going to ask you what you've done to that hand. It looks vaguely menacing, or a little bit like a kind of prototype emu or something. Yeah. I haven't got the feathers on yet. Anyway, we kick off this evening's Innards, Steve, with the Mail. And Britain's homeowners are about to learn why it's called the death grip.
Yes, mortgage. Big mortgage meltdown, 1.4 million Brits face losing at least a fifth of their disposable income. And I've looked at it, and I have a mortgage, and when I look at my disposable income, I don't think I have a fifth. I know how fractions work, and I still think that number you can't divide by 5 and have anything left. I mean, this is worrying for a lot of people. It's especially going to hit the 30-somethings, so at least there's a bit of good news for me. But don't forget, this is kind of what they want. The idea that you've got this persistent inflation, so you have to increase interest rates to take money away from us. This is taking money. You're not going to spend this in a shop.
This is exactly what I say all the time about, like, not just economics, but like almost everything in government policy that gets refracted through the newspapers is they demand something in order to achieve certain ends. And when it starts achieving them, they go, oh, my God. It's like they wanted green policies for decades. And as soon as they introduce them, they go, but it's a war on motorists. Well, yes, that's what you were asking for, you know. Yeah. And I have to say, I've been a homeowner, you know, I've been extraordinarily lucky, been a homeowner for over 20 years, and it's provided me with an extraordinarily beneficial, you know, relationship with capital. It's the only thing I own that's made money. It's the only investment I've ever made, but it's completely unearned wealth.
It's a form of gambling, isn't it?
Yeah, it is essentially. And if you get a big mortgage, then it increases the leverage you have over, you know. So I've got to take the pain when it comes.
You gamble on the value of the property, and you gamble on whether the rate's going to go up or not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And house prices are a reflection of mortgages over the long term as well. If mortgage rates stay high, that will bring house prices down, which is another thing that everybody has been bellowing for some time, you know. So,
although it seems like there are efforts done to keep house prices high, because whichever political party is in power when house prices drop, that's going to be a slap for them.
It's the only feel-good factor there is left in Britain. I'm afraid now we've run out of North Sea oil. It's the only thing left to convince ourselves we're still a viable country. But I do remember in 2008 when we had the big financial crash, and everyone went, well, there's bound to be a housing crash here. There was definitely a deflation, there was a correction or whatever, but there was not the crash people were expecting. And the reason was sterling took the hit instead. And loads of foreign money flooded into the London property market, which, you know, created all kinds of dysfunction itself.
On this, I do want to mention, because I love it when people skip over this and say, we had 15% back in the 90s. Yeah, you had a 15% interest rate on something that was 4 times your salary.
Yeah, and for about a week as well. It didn't last very long, and it did bring down the Tory government. I mean, that was the end of the major government, wasn't it?
We had
the
VRM.
In the 90s.
But if this is a 6% mortgage on something that's now like 14 times your salary, it's going to be a harder reach.
Well, nobody should have a mortgage. I think they still have the same multiplier, don't they? I don't know. Ours was sort of 3 or 4. We bought houses at roughly the same time, didn't we? Was that right? Yeah.
I don't think you can just get...
How much they've gone up in value, you mean?
Well, no, the multiplier of your salary that is the biggest mortgage you can get, the value of the mortgage. I think it used to be about 3.5, 4 times your salary, something like that.
It's more than that now. I think that's...
Is it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a short time ago, before the crash, there were 95% mortgages.
Yeah. Oh, I remember you could get 110% mortgages. They give you some extra money just to get some nice furnishings. And then you should have self-accreditation as well. If you didn't have any documentation to prove you were a good credit risk, they just ask you whether you thought you were a good
It was a more innocent time.
It was. Dave, we have The Guardian now, and it sounds like Labour have decided that they too should have some senior cabinet ministers of non-white stock.
Yes, this is... Labour will appoint Diversity SAR to remove barriers to enter politics. Labour will appoint a Diversity SAR in the hope of encouraging more women, ethnic minorities and those from a working-class background to stand for office against all political levels and parties. Well, yeah. I mean, I think just, you know, if they put money into education and educate more people, it's sort of hopefully naturally going to happen. I welcome diversity, I welcome what they're suggesting, although I would draw the line at people with nose rings and facial piercings.
Yeah, I don't want to see face tattoos either in the House of Commons, not just yet, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I always feel these, like, tokenistic efforts, you know. I don't know, is it an age thing? When I was younger, I used to be quite in favour of them, and I used to row with my dad, and he would say that these things were, you know, they were artificial and that they would distort the... You know, he didn't use these words, but he just said a load of nonsense. But as I get older, I don't think they work terribly well. I think it's much better, as you say, to cultivate the pool, you know, so that it just naturally produces the quality that will flow upwards.
But that's not really worked so far.
No, why is that?
I don't know, but it seems like...
I mean, I guess the default hypothesis has to be... I'm not going to say that. I'll get sacked.
Yeah, you got that. But the idea that somehow, that, you know, if there's no barrier to get into politics, how is it that all of our prime ministers went to Oxford apart from one who went to Cambridge?
Well, more importantly, they all went to Eton. That's the place where you get taught, and that has the lowest level of expectation of that's like the lowest kind of standardised testing. Of any school. It doesn't care how academic you are at all, Eton. It's about problem solving and about independence and self-starting and all that
it's about who you're related to, isn't it? It's about where the money is.
I think Napoleon Bonaparte came from quite low beginnings, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He did well.
Well, he found a crown in a gutter. You can't all expect us to do that. What I want to know is how it has come to pass, though, that the Tory party clearly have much more diversity on its front bench now. Well, I say diversity, ethnic diversity, certainly, possibly not ability diversity. There's a very ability-diverse front bench on the Labour side, I would say.
Although, I mean, everyone's got an axe to grind in this one, and when I was reading the story, every time it said class, I thought, yeah, actually, probably more should be done to mix up the class pot. Yeah. But I would say that, wouldn't I? Because, you know...
You can't talk about class now. It's all... That's the... Class. Fallen into that.
You caught it.
It's all about everything but. That's neo-Marxism for you. Steve, Times next. Ever-mounting evidence that lockdown was a disastrous decision that threw young people under more buses than Brexit.
The comedy gold topic of self-harm and eating disorders. Thank you. We've seen self-harm and eating disorders in teenage girls soar since COVID. The interesting thing in the article, they've got an expert saying that the reason there's a difference, that the wealthier teenagers more likely to have an eating disorder, from a poorer background more likely to do self-harm, the expert says it could be to do with a difference in the availability of testing and help. It's not interesting enough. I think it would be more interesting if we could really make up some theory about how posh people
But they should be able to do these things. They should do a proper regression analysis before they make it into the paper, shouldn't they, to establish what are the independent variables?
Seems like more work than they're willing to do to pad out this. But they say it's a staggering rise. They also blame unhealthy social media influencers, yes.
Yeah.
Because this story, the headline definitely sets you up to just blame COVID.
Yeah.
I'm sure it plays a role. There's so much in it. And here's an interesting point. We didn't see an increase in men, even though there's a higher number than we've previously had. There wasn't an increase during this time period of young men reporting the same problems. They went through the same lockdown. So there's clearly more to be unpicked here.
I mean, there is something, I don't know how you feel about this, Dave, but there is something in the air at the moment, isn't there? And I don't know whether these things just rise and fall like a kind of tide or something, but there's something around teenagers experiencing a lot of anxiety, depression, confusion, identity crisis. Obviously, the gender stuff is a part of it. I mean, what were your observations?
I think it must be horrible being a teenager at the moment. I mean, it looks like the world's going to end, or our lives are going to end anyway.
You can't help wondering, can you, whether Greta isn't part of the problem in this respect? Because I do feel that, I mean, somebody posted today a thing from 5 years ago where she said, unless we stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years, stop, not cut, but stop, the world is over, it's going to end. And somebody was posted it today going, well, we're still here, but I mean, that stuff sticks in the fur, do you know what I mean?
But then the blokes would have been listening to that as well, and this information tells you something else is happening.
Well, boys and girls go through different stages, puberty and adolescence. I have a son and a daughter, they're called, aren't they? Yeah, a son and a girl. I was thinking that's not quite, doesn't match up. And I mean, by no means am I saying the boy is like fine and the girl is bats, but they're right, they have different kinds of anxieties and they occur at different times and so on. I think puberty through adolescence for girls is really like a treacherous terrain, you know?
Well, most people seem to have, you know, that now, like, they've got autism and ADHD and all these things. You know, I mean, it seems more people have got something like that than don't have something like that.
They are being constantly pathologised. I absolutely agree with you, and I don't think it's any good for them at all. I think a stretch in the army would probably sort them out.
Yeah, probably would, actually.
Another little interesting thing from this one is that on this show, often you'll get a commentator say, since the increase in people declaring themselves trans, young girls, we've seen a drop in eating disorders. Well, we haven't.
Well,
so
it's going back up again.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's more on this shortly, but there's statistical shenanigans. But in the meantime, diplomacy news in the Times, Dave. And I'll be honest, when I look at Joe Biden, I think more diplodocus than diplomacy. But what's he done?
Well, two old men. Well, this is... Joe Biden threatens US-China détente by calling Xi Jinping, is that how to pronounce it?
Xi Jinping.
Yeah. It depends on which region of China you're from.
Yes, that's right.
A dictator. President Biden said President Xi was very upset when the US shot down a spy balloon in February. Well, I can't help wondering whether there was just a little fake Richard Branson, plastic Richard Branson. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Because on the one hand, they're stopping information, so people in China don't get access to the internet.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, they're gathering information by sending out balloons to float over.
Well, there is, I mean, you're right. China is, I mean, in some respects, I have previously, I think I've said out loud, you know, people have said this about Ukraine and Russia. You now know how you would have reacted to Nazi, threat in the 1930s, you know, if you know now. But I've been saying that about China for some time. You know, there is clearly the same level of threat, but what we miss is that they are operating on an entirely different dimension. Traditional warfare has all been about traditional armaments, whereas China is entirely about information.
And it's a culture of cruelty anyway, isn't it? I mean, you can't blame the people, but if you look back at Chinese history, there's so much cruelty.
Well, it's an enormous population, isn't it? And so that always seems to lead to an extraordinarily callous form of rule.
Death by 1,000 cuts and stuff.
I mean, this story, thinking about Joe Biden's age and his track record for saying things, it could have been worse, what he said. And in terms of how to pronounce his name, just as an aside, these days I get my phone to read the stories to me as I'm driving in, and they pronounced his name as 11 Jinping.
Ah, 11 Jinping. That could be 11 Ping. As he was the first 11, at least, anyway. So
I'm torn with this one, because on the one hand, I think we should just stop doing business with China, stop buying their stuff.
Good luck with that.
And then, and then they won't be able to do the stuff. And then the other thing...
really mess with my Amazon Prime subscription.
But otherwise, just integrate, you know, and sort of share culture and just try and, you know, get people more... They've got
I remember 20 years ago in the pub arguing very much an optimistic in that mode, you know, that liberalising trade with China was bound
I must I'm encouraged by the fact that they're getting them, like they're making all those islands in the China Sea.
Yeah.
Because I think it's not a military thing. I think they're just making like fake, cheap Maldives, and we'll be able to go on like cheap package holidays.
Geek news now to round up this section. Steve, this should be right up your garden path and into your garden shed, I would imagine, is it?
Well, I'm not a gamer. I do like computers, but give me a spreadsheet instead, which is still useful. This story is Legend of Zelda computer game.
Yeah.
Has been blamed for a spike in inflation. This version of the game is called Tears of the Kingdom, so that hits hard, doesn't it?
Fastest selling Nintendo game ever.
Yeah,
Guinness Book of Records.
#1. And so here's the problem, that maybe it's true, and this expert says that all of recreation and culture added about 0.06% to core inflation. But, I mean, I suppose we didn't have this in the 80s.
No.
You know, Horace Goes Skiing on the ZX Spectrum did not affect GDP.
But I remember I did a show a few years ago about the Guinness Book of Records, or partly about it, comparing my 1973 edition with my son's 2017 edition, and my version had, like, massive, open cast mining statistics and this sort of thing, and his was just full of who has completed Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time in the shortest time span. It is a world-breaking game, right? It's like an absolutely iconic... I've never played it, or wouldn't even recognise it.
I've not played it either. It's a double whammy, I suppose, because people buying it will give us a spike in inflation, and then people going home and playing it when they should be working from home will ruin productivity.
That's much more problematic. That is it for part 2. Join us in part 3 for Amazon shenanigans, again, confessional sins, and Schaefer in the papers. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
And welcome back to Headliners. So, Dave, part 3 will kick off with The Mirror and an alarming story about what sounds like a deluded, paranoid schizophrenic being given free rein on a highly esteemed national broadcasting network to spout dangerous conspiracy theories utterly untethered from reality.
Yes, well, GB News, COVID denier sparks Ofcom storm with furious viewers racing to complain. GB News headliners have been hit with yet another Ofcom scandal after Lewis Schaefer made a string of claims suggesting coronavirus wasn't a real virus. GB News has been slapped with 151 Ofcom complaints.
That's a storm.
It's basically, it's like, where does freedom of speech end and censorship begin? You know,
well, I mean, you know, if it was up to me, it would stop short of Lewis
Exactly. I think you should they should give people the respect to make their own decisions and come to their own conclusions and not get protected.
It's an interesting one on this. I mean, to be minutely serious about it, before I come on to the Mirror's own appalling reporting standards on this story, but Schaefer obviously is a bit of an outlier, even by the standards of this show, but it is presented clearly by comedians. It's comedians discussing things, but he is not merely a comedian, he is like, he's a maverick, isn't he? And I think there is possibly... It might depend if it was the first time you'd seen the show and you didn't understand quite what the Schaefer proposition was. You might think he was a bit odd, but what do you feel, Steve?
Well, there's 151 complaints. Sounds bad, but don't worry, 2 of those were me.
Yeah.
Because you've got to keep him in check. I mean, I'd want to know who won the sweepstake about when Lewis Schaefer would get in trouble like this, because I had months ago. I'm amazed it managed to get this far. Me and Lewis argue online in private, because he doesn't even think viruses exist.
No, I have another friend like that, and he's currently working very hard and seriously on the flat Earth theory as well. I mean, the COVID has sent some people spinning off into outer space, there's no question about it. But on the other hand, so much weird stuff did go on over those 2 years. I do think... I'm not saying it's an excuse for not believing viruses exist, but I do think it is not remotely surprising that some people have started to question more than they might normally have otherwise done.
It's the method in which they question, though. Lots of people have this strategy. I'll ask you a question. If you can't answer it, therefore, what I guess must be true.
Yeah.
And that's how a lot of these work. Like, well, how comes that happens? Therefore, it must be chemtrails or something like that.
Yeah.
Whereas I think there's a lot of logical points that should be argued that aren't. So I agree we should ask questions, but that has to follow through with proper intellectual pursuit of the truth rather than just...
I would agree with you. However, this bit amused me because I was involved in it. I'm going to find it. It said that Lewis Schaefer, on GB News, the paper review programme, saw host Simon Evans and Mark Dolan's guest Lewis Schaefer make a string of comments about the coronavirus. Neither of us were on the show. Mark Dolan hasn't hosted this show for months. I had hosted it a couple of nights earlier, but I wasn't there then.
Fake news.
Do you think I have a case? Do you think that who can I complain to?
Go for
sort of ombudsman?
Go for it.
If you want the newspapers to turn against you, then...
Anyway, I would say, generally speaking, we do try and give a reasonably balanced take on the news here, but Lewis Schaefer is a bit of an outlier. Times now, Dave. Good to see that the Roman Catholic Church is moving with the times and getting involved in workplace review.
This is California. A restaurant used a fake priest to extract employee confessions. The owners of a Mexican restaurant in California have been ordered to pay $140,000 in back wages and damages after using a fake priest to trick staff into confessing their workplace sins.
And I like the idea of a fake priest. He sounds like he's not even human, like he's a little sort of plastic, like a desktop priest or something.
Yeah,
money in the slot.
Makes me wonder, did they get a fake rabbi for the Jewish employees?
Well, I suppose this is Mexico. I don't know. I mean, maybe they felt...
It's California.
California. Sorry, Mexican restaurant, right?
It's a Mexican restaurant.
I'm treating Mexican restaurants as being a bit like consulates. You know, they're reclaiming that. What's Mexico 100 years ago, right?
I love this story.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you fall for it for a second?
Yeah.
This has all of the qualities of the plot of an episode of Sergeant Bilko. It's like, we need to get a fake priest to make this happen. It's brilliant.
And who was it? Was it a private detective or was it an actor?
Yeah.
I think they should play a trick on him. They should get a fake Spanish Inquisition.
But you just never know who might be that person. In this workplace, it's probably that 32-year-old blonde that keeps trying to get me to see her for after-work drinks, isn't it? And seems to be extraordinarily interested in all my
You're right, that must be
tattle. It's very easy to get people to spill the beans in a Mexican restaurant. I'm so sorry.
Spill the refried beans.
Tune in, turn on Steve now with The Independent. It looks like the Jefferson Airplane were right about feeding your head.
Yes, psychedelic drugs can unlock the brain's ability to learn new skills. Which means that taking that evening class is going to get messy. So they've looked at it and they've tried to look at this time period when the brain can learn again. They don't actually mention neuroplasticity in this, but I think it must be linked to this.
Yeah.
The idea that when your brain is young, it can just absorb information, especially languages. You get older, it stops. But if you do some of these drugs, these psychedelic drugs, for quite a considerable amount, it's not just minutes. For days and weeks, you can still have
afterwards.
the ability.
Because the actual, not that I'm an expert, of course, but the length of the trip varies wildly as well. If you do MDMA, which I think is mentioned in there, that's usually 3 or 4 hours. Whereas there are some, I mean, if you take mescaline, that can be, which is what Aldous Huxley did in The Doors of Perception, that can be 48 hours before you're quite right again.
Yeah.
I don't know whether these are...
Well, I think we also should add the context that this was done on mice.
Right.
And the mice learned
with human brains, though, right?
With attached to their backs.
Like the human lungs in the albino mice.
They make them have the quality of human lungs. And none of these mice learn to speak a language.
No,
so that's worth bearing in mind.
It is interesting, because I don't know what neuroplasticity obviously is a sort of metaphor. It doesn't literally mean that it becomes sort of more pliable.
No.
I think vascularity is supposed to be an important part of it, right? How open the blood channels are in the brain. And this has a significant effect on IQ, in fact, apparently. Like the smooth flowing of blood through your brain is actually as much a part of, getting the oxygen. I don't know. It depends what exactly is opened up.
I wish they'd told us this earlier, like about 30 years ago.
Yeah, not 2 hours earlier.
I felt guilty for taking LSD just before my finals.
It's too late to learn just before the exam.
Yeah.
You should have been doing LSD earlier.
Stop cramming up there. Dave, this is a tricky one in the Telegraph. Sanctimonious vegans versus vaccine mandates. I just don't know who to back on this one.
Yeah, well, I'm with the vegan on this one.
OK, go for it.
I read between... it's about eating a vegan diet is not the same as a philosophical belief, a tribunal ruled.
No, OK.
Basically, a judge threw out a case where a care home worker who claimed that she could be exempt from having COVID vaccine because it had been tested on animals. And the judge said that eating a vegan diet did not amount to a philosophical belief and threw it out. Now, I think that wasn't she just using it as an excuse to not have to have the vaccine?
Yeah, and that in itself is that's a stronger philosophical belief, one that's enshrined in the Nuremberg Code, I believe, isn't it? Where you can't be forced to do anything of a medical intervention against your will, which is, that's not just a philosophical belief, that's a well-established principle. This feels wrong to me, this.
I don't think people should be forced to take a vaccine.
No, even though, I mean, I understand, putting aside the whole kind of the way they got it wrong, if you're working in a care home and you might be a vector which would infect the elderly, I can see that of all the kind of jobs in which perhaps they might have been allowed to insist you get vaccinated. I don't know, because there are probably other vaccines you have to take before you can get work in a care home.
But haven't Pfizer admitted that they lied about the vaccine?
Oh, yeah,
they said that you can't, once you've had it, you can't spread it to other people.
You can't spread it, no.
That was a lie. They've admitted it was a lie.
Well, it was a mistruth. I don't know whether they absolutely knew.
I don't think they ever said that. They said they didn't do specific research looking at transmissibility. However, if you don't catch it, you can't transmit.
There are certainly some extraordinarily incriminating video evidence of plenty of people like Fauci and Biden and Camilla Harris and so on. Not Camilla Harris, that's I'm going to mashing up the Queen and the VP. But, a lot of people did say that, certainly on air. I don't know whether Pfizer head himself said that.
And I think there are statistics where there's a higher death rate where there were low rates of vaccination. But they don't tell us that.
Also, we've moved a bit far away from this story. I do think being a vegan is a philosophical belief because of you met the ones for whom it is philosophical.
Absolutely.
They mention it.
Well, that can't even be a legal category. I mean, anything could be a philosophical belief, can't it? Flat Earth is a philosophical belief.
Yeah, it's a philosophical belief, but what does that mean we should do about it? It means you should change your action, not the world should shape itself around your philosophical beliefs.
Absolutely. But the ancient Greeks, the pre-Socratics, they thought everything was fire or everything was water or everything was... There's German idealism. It's like everything is just an idea. I mean, these are, they're counter to most people's modes of living, but they are still philosophical beliefs.
And this care worker never objected to giving medication that had been tested on animals.
No.
I bet the tribunal never made that point.
Well, that is it for part 3. Plenty to ponder on there. Join us in a couple of minutes. We will have some cis slurs, some Japanese gender wars, and some portrait pronouns. See you in a couple of minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. I'm Mark Dolan. Into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Headliners. The Daily Mail now, Stephen. I think for the first time, Elon Musk may have outmanoeuvred me on the right.
The words cisgendered are considered slurs on this platform, says Elon Musk. This, and anyone who uses them, faces suspension. This is going to make it very difficult to tweet about first-year chemistry. Because anyone, it's all right if you've got your functional groups on the same side of that carbon double bond, but how are you going to describe it?
The word cis does just mean on the same side, in the same sense that the word trans means on the other side, or crossing or something, doesn't it? So you get transatlantic and then cisatlantic, which is the Irish.
Yeah.
But I do think it is sometimes used as a slur in the same way that TERF, which is short for trans-exclusionary radical feminist, right? Now, that is a term which is, I think, objectively an accurate description of a lot of feminists. They are radical feminists, which means that they feel that women have been, you know, they are biologically compromised, as it were, in the society as it is set up. And just because you identify as a woman, you can't be experiencing the same level of exclusion. And yet when you spit it out in a certain way, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of racial slurs start out as, you know, borderline descriptive terms.
Yeah. I mean, I would say no one using the word TERF to someone is meaning it in a kind way. And it's certainly true, some people, even in this story, using cis to try and harass someone. But there will be loads of people using cis to simply be descriptive, because in their worldview, it means the opposite of it just means not trans. So in this story, someone tweeted saying that she doesn't want to be called cis, and then, this is the problem, people then did a pile-on, calling her cis, using it as a way to harass her. And the rules of the platform that you can't do sustained harassment, and this is, if you look at more detail of what he says, Elon Musk is saying you can't lengthily harass someone.
So we will see that as harassment if they've indicated they don't want to hear that. And
Whereas you can definitely still use the word cis, because someone tweeted saying, "What if I consider myself cis? Can I call myself that?" Elon says you can call yourself whatever you want. So actually, the words haven't been banned. Harassing's already banned.
Yeah. Which is fair.
I thought turf was to do with horse racing and cis was to do with your sister. They don't have this in Hungary. The big debate with women in Hungary is what colour to dye their hair.
Yeah, well, as soon as it turns blue, you'll start be hearing about cis shortly after that, I'm afraid. Let's move on to our next story. World Economic Forum news now, Dave, and a message has been beamed directly into the cerebral cortex of Japan's leaders to elevate their women into politics.
Yeah, well, Japan is below Saudi Arabia in the global gender equality ranking. Japan has the worst representation of women in politics and business of any advanced democracy. And we need to humbly accept our country's current situation. Hirokazu Matsuno, the chief cabinet secretary, said, "The government as a whole will aggressively push forward efforts." I personally think he's paying lip service to the West.
I suspect he is.
Because Japan is a very, very strong and traditional culture. They're not really interested in us meddling with it. I think, I mean, people knock empires and stuff, very rightly so. But in a way, isn't it imperialist for us to expect other countries and other cultures on the other side of the world to have our views and our systems?
It's certainly imperialist of the World Economic Forum to be producing these documents, because we know very well on this channel that the World Economic Forum is as close to Sauron's ever watchful eye as exists in the modern world.
I do like a bit in the story where they promised to get 30% women in top jobs and in... because 30%'s enough. That note of
well, they've got two major problems in Japan at the moment, one of which is essentially a numerical sort of what I might call a cosmetic or a PR-related problem, which is this one, and the other one is that they've got the most fastly ageing population and the lowest rate of fertility of any major developed nation outside of South Korea and Singapore, which are, I think, below 1 and are just enormous IQ sinks, but do at least suck in huge amounts of immigration to bolster their economy. Japan has virtually no immigration at all.
They don't want foreigners.
So essentially they have two choices of what to do with their women, if we can speak about it in this extraordinarily brutal terms. They can either encourage them to have more babies or they can encourage them to become ministers. They can't do both.
Although the story actually says the move forward is to try and make it more possible to both have a child and get into politics.
Well,
so
if any country is going to come up with an artificial womb, I suppose it is most likely to be Japan. I remember a time in the late 1980s, I had a mate who worked for a foreign exchange desk in a Japanese bank in Leadenhall Street. And so I was sort of aware of just how incredibly powerful the Japanese economy were. I mean, we were afraid that they were going to rule the world. And they've just gone into this weird kind of stasis now. They just seem to be in a very odd... I mean, I accept what you say totally, Daya. I agree with you about them being entitled to maintain their own culture. But they're sort of... I don't know, they almost seem to have just settled into a weird... I mean, in some regards, probably, quite functional, incredibly high trust, zero crime, but...
They've got the Shinto religion. I don't know how true this is, but a friend of mine told me that they don't tolerate Islam. So, and they don't like people... It's very hard to migrate or to move to Japan unless you have some special skill that they want. They don't want any Muslims in the country at all.
I mean, I think we're skirting around it, but I think it would be fair to say it's an extremely racist society. I know of people... There are stories, they say, if their teenagers come to Europe and for a couple of years to study or for a gap year or whatever, when they go back to Japan, they are essentially sort of decontaminated. They are de-Europeanised.
And I'm not saying this is... I agree with this. I don't agree with it, but a friend of mine who was into that macrobiotic cookery, which is all based on yin and yang, and he said that the women do the cookery and they control the men by deciding how much yin and how much yang to put in the food that they give them.
That makes sense. Steve, we fly up north now with The Guardian. Further evidence that so long and thanks for all the fish might have been optimistic.
Yeah, an orca rams into a yacht off Shetland in first such incident in northern waters. It's exhibiting behaviour towards this vessel in the North Sea. In many ways, this orca has now done more to stop small boats than Rishi has managed ever since. So
could we get them into the channel, do you think? That's genius. I hadn't thought of that.
So, and the guy, this septuagenarian fisherman, said, maybe you just wanted to play. Yeah, well, ease it off. You know, be aware of the fact that you're a huge, massive thing. Didn't damage it, he just dented the aluminium.
They're incredibly intelligent, though, aren't they, orca? And when they hunt as packs, they play, right? They will toy with their prey and all the rest of it, you know.
That's all evil. I mean, intelligent or evil. And they're coming for us now. So
I think they just realise that humans are just ruining the planet and they need to kill us off. They're too small to attack big ships, so they just try and pick off the small boats.
Remember, it's only 2016, remember, the year of the celebrity death toll. There were also, do you remember all those whales were washing up on a beach, Lowestoft or somewhere like that, because they've been confused by ferries? I think the orca are taking the fight to us. I think that's far more... I think
it's the submarines, the military submarines that communicate with very low frequency radio waves or something.
Yeah.
So they might be radioing back to base saying, you know, we're getting low on coffee, mate. And the whales hear it as head for the beach and await further instructions.
Over to The Guardian now again, Dave, and as dishonest a framing a story as I think I've seen since the last time I read The Guardian. Yeah, this is the height one, right?
Children raised under UK austerity are shorter than their European peers, a study finds. Average height of boys and girls aged 5 has slipped due to poor diet, NHS cuts, experts say.
So can I tell you why this is rubbish framing? I don't know if you spotted it. If you actually read the heights of the children, they've risen. They've not slipped. They are taller now than they were in 1985.
Really?
But the rest of the world has improved more quickly, unsurprisingly. So austerity, Paul, which is supposed to have shrunk our kids, has in fact allowed our kids to grow taller than they were, but just not as much taller
as the Bulgarians.
So we're lower in the table than we used to do, just for that.
It's mostly talking about Bulgaria, Montenegro and Lithuania and their children. I just thought that the Europeans use centimetres to measure their height, we use inches.
I'm afraid it's not that. Have you got the numbers? I'll tell you what the numbers are, just so you don't think I'm making it up. In 1985, the average 5-year-old boy was 111.4 centimetres, and he's now 112.5 centimetres. So he's grown by a centimetre, and yet they're saying he's shrunk due to austerity. Despicable.
I see it as a good
That is all
thing.
we have time for, I'm afraid, tonight. The show is nearly over. Let's take another quick look at Thursday's front pages. The Daily Mail. Tories turn on bank over rates crisis. The Telegraph, NHS lung cancer test for every ex-smoker. The Guardian, girls at Del Monte pineapple farm accused of killings in Kenya. Financial Times has stubborn inflation piles pressure on Bank of England to take tough action. The Eye, mortgage pain deepens as new rate rises spark recession fears. The Daily Star, their last hope. Those were your front pages. That's all we have time for. Thank you to my guests, Steve Allen and Dave Thompson. We're back tomorrow at 11 p.m, when Nick Dixon will be in the chair, joined by Lewis Schaefer, you've been warned, and Paul Cox. And if you're watching at 5 a.m, stay tuned for breakfast. Otherwise, good night.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the people's channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Tonight, well, the inflation figures once again were very disappointing. We will debate, has the Bank of England blown it? We'll also get the latest update from across the pond as to what's happening with that missing submarine that went down to have a look at the Titanic. And we have an update on the hate cleric story that we exposed last night. Mr. Abbasi was on a tour of the United Kingdom. I'm pleased to say one of his events has already been cancelled. That and much else after the news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Well, the very latest in our top story this hour is that the US Coast Guard says they're searching an area underwater where noises have been detected as they race to find a missing tourist submersible visiting the Titanic. 5 surface assets and 2 remotely operated vehicles are currently deployed in the North Atlantic. Officials did, however, say they don't really know what the noises are or if they originated from the Titan, but trained audiologists are listening in and analysing those noises. 5 people are inside the craft. They may have as little as 20 hours oxygen left, limited rations on board as well. British-Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman are on board, along with British billionaire explorer Hamish Harding. Captain Jamie Frederick from the US Coast Guard said within the last hour rescuers have to remain optimistic.
The surface search is now approximately 2 times the size of Connecticut, and the subsurface search is up to 2.5 miles deep, exponentially expanding the size of the search area. We also have to factor in the ever-changing weather conditions, currents, and sea states that expand the search area every hour. There is an enormous complexity associated with this case due to the location being so far offshore, and the coordination between multiple agencies and nations.
Well, we'll keep you up to date on that story, of course, throughout the rest of the evening. Meanwhile, a man was arrested today following a stabbing outside Central Middlesex Hospital in West London. 2 people sustained injuries, one with life-threatening injuries. The suspect admitted to hospital with severe self-inflicted injuries. A spokesperson for the hospital says the building was temporarily locked down but has since reopened. Armed police were deployed to the scene, but the incident was not being treated as terror-related. Now, as you've been hearing, the UK's inflation rates stayed the same despite expectations. There may have been a little fall. The Office for National Statistics released its figures showing inflation stayed at 8.7% up till the end of May. That's the same rate as during April, and that comes as the UK's net debt reached £2.6 trillion at the end of the same month. Meanwhile, the average UK house price increased by 3.5% in the 12 months to April. The government has set out a major package of financial support for Ukraine to bolster the country's economic stability as it continues to push back Russian forces. The package includes a £20 million boost